So many countries globally are very good at producing scale-ups, but not enough of those companies can actually scale. Scale companies are the real drivers of future economic growth, and so what can be done to ensure that those companies with the ambition and desire to scale are provided with the right support and their specific needs? And what are the strategies and plans those companies have to put in place to successfully scale? That is what we are going to discuss, and we are going to kick off this session by a presentation of Irene Graham, the CEO of the ScaleUp Institute.
Good morning, everyone. It's terrific to be here in Manchester, the heart of one of the UK's core creative clusters, and among so many countries which I've had the opportunity to work with across many years, both in my current and past roles. Isn't it terrific that we've also had the creative influence of George Lucas with us here this morning in kicking off this session, with a few words of one might call episodic wisdom, highlighting just how vital scale-ups are to each of our nation's economies. And rightly, at this time of global uncertainty, we need to have this point of reflection of how we get behind our local scale-ups and address the challenges of these growth companies as they face the opportunities they have and optimize the futures and address our global societal issues. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a conundrum. We are, as nations, becoming very good at startups, but we are, frankly, far less good at growing them. As Professor Dan Eisenberg reflects, bringing a child into the world is generally easier than the growing pains they will face as they develop into adulthood. And this is true in our business cycles today. Take, for example, our European continent, including the UK. In 2011, we started 2.4 million companies, but only 42% of those have survived after 5 years. And most staggeringly, data suggests only 0.17% reach the scale-up phase of growth. That is, those growing at 20% or more per year for 3 years in turnover employment. Yet, as a scale-up investor and co-founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman says, first mover advantage doesn't go to the first company that launches. It goes to the first company that scales. And scale-ups matter to our economies because they are our true innovators. They are our creators of jobs, of revenue, and opportunities across all sectors. Scale-ups are in the main international businesses, much more productive than their counterparts. They are the companies who have the ambition to keep growing at hyper levels. Just pause for a moment. We always talk about SMEs as if they are one homogeneous mass of all the same types of businesses with all the same needs and the same growth patterns. That is simply not the case. Take the example of the UK. We have 5.7 million SMEs generating 1.9 trillion to the UK economy. However, out of these SMEs, it is the 36,500 scale-up SMEs driving 1 trillion of that turnover. 0.6% of all SMEs, the scale-ups. That is why, whether we are in the public, the private, or the education and research sector, we absolutely must hone in on our scaling businesses and address their challenges if we are truly to further our economic opportunities and drive impact across our communities. Scaling businesses consistently tell us they have 5 key challenges, significant barriers which they need public and private sector to help them overcome. These are access to talent, getting the right people and skills into the business from schools, from universities and overseas. Markets, picking up David's point, corporate collaboration and procurement, government collaboration and procurement, and internationalization. Building out their leadership capacity and gaining access to finance, most notably patient growth capital. And picking up the infrastructure point, access to infrastructure, both in terms of space to grow, but also putting on the map, putting these businesses in place and spotlighting them, engaging with them early. Equally, scale-ups tell us they most consistently value in addressing these challenges local peer networks, local access to university and school facilities, and local leadership development opportunities, alongside more local, coordinated access to national public sector level support, most notably in R&D and innovation, through coordinated hubs with a proactive relationship management approach. Now, do recognize, I stress local here. We must deliver to scaling businesses in their local communities. So, what must we do to address our scale-up needs and achieve more scale-up success, so vital to all our economies? First of all, we need to work together as a truly collaborative ecosystem. One of the principal reasons for the ScaleUp Institute being established was in order to foster and catalyze that collaboration across corporate financiers, media, educators, the local and public and private sector players, and across geographies. No one lever will address the challenges at hand. We need to properly segment the businesses we work with and harness significant resources towards those scaling businesses. A great example here is in the UK with Innovate UK and how they've segmented their services, and also their EEN initiative, which includes RMs and a range of scale-up directors. This is already generating huge dividends, and you will hear from Martin Leeming shortly on what this has meant for this company, Trakrap, who's also in the spotlight zone. We need to join up with tailored and targeted scale-up solutions that are accessible and easy to navigate, creating a virtuous circle for our scale-ups, from local to national to international services. And at the same time, we need to break down barriers to collaboration. The strategic, cultural, procedural, structural barriers that we put in place in government and large corporates that makes it very difficult for our scaling businesses to engage. We need to make it easier to transact globally. Scale-ups want connections to overseas buyers. They want access to partners and talent to help them win overseas contracts. We must create coordinated policies in a concerted effort to break down scale-up barriers, again in the private and public sector. The ScaleUp Institute believes that here, all nations in this world should have a 10-point scale-up plan to address scale-up challenges, ranging from use of data, scale-up visas, scale-up champions at minister level, at local level, the funding being delivered and tied to scale-up deliverables and impact. Using data effectively has the power to unleash significant scale-up opportunity. Something we've done here with HMRC, our tax group, has to be using their data, connect local scale-ups to services that are on offer. And in Thames Valley, most recently, a business that wasn't known was connected to their local growth hub and gained access in 300,000 of investment, which they had previously no ability to source. We also need to leverage what works around the world. And picking up David's point, one of our key roles at the ScaleUp Institute is to focus on identifying what works and educating others on this, and how to adopt and adapt such practices into local scale-up economies and sustainable initiatives. Whether that be Manizales Mass in Colombia, Scale-Up Milwaukee, MIT, the Goldman Sachs and the elite global programs, the Lazaridis Institute, you'll hear from Kim later, we need to make sure we connect these to local scale-ups and we build on these initiatives at a local level. So, as we move forward today, ladies and gentlemen, please take on board and recognize that startups are our pipeline. SMEs are our core. But it is scale-ups that will truly ensure our nations, our societies, and indeed our globe continues to flourish. The ScaleUp Institute charges all of you to go forth from here today and champion your local scale-ups. Harness data to identify them, collaborate further with them, and assist them in their growth drive at home and abroad. Celebrate their successes. Enable them to go beyond their current borders and realize their fullest potential. May the ScaleUp force always be with you. The ScaleUp Institute certainly looks forward to the future rise of scale-ups in all your
My name is Svein Berg. I'm the head of Nordic Innovation, which is an organization owned by the 5 Nordic governments. And our mission is to enhance innovation and business development across the Nordic countries. And being here, I have to also underline that I have actually worked in a scale-up.
Very good. We come back to that for sure later on. Thomas.
So I'm Thomas Hoegh. I'm an entrepreneur and an investor. I've built 5 companies and I've invested in another 50, some of which failed. Some of them became scale-ups, and I'm involved in a whole bunch of companies today that are going through this journey that was just described by Irene.
Hi, I'm Kim Morouney, and I'm the Managing Director of the Lazaridis Institute in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. And we were funded by Mike Lazaridis, the founder of BlackBerry, and the provincial government. And we're an institute that supports scholarly research, practical research. We're compiling a database of innovative Canadian companies, and our flagship is our ScaleUp program.
Martin.
Mine is Martin Leeming. I originally did a degree in engineering and then became a retail professional with Asda, and left about probably 9 years ago to set up a business that combined both my passions for both engineering and retail, and to try and create the lowest cost, most environmentally packaging solution in the world, which is quite apt these days. So I'm also on the ScaleUp program, and for the first time ever, we've introduced and are demonstrating our machine here today.
Okay, thank you. So, Martin, if I just may remain with you for now. I think when we come back to the presentation of Irene, she said, may the ScaleUp force be with you. And did you mention some points that were really familiar to you so far in your experiences in scaling up the company?
Yeah, very much so. We talk about something called the pain point, where you're actually going between that transition between getting a good idea, making it work, and then being able to scale it up and getting it to market. And the funny bit is, you don't actually know when you're there. You just, it needs something, some other input to do that. At that point, which was probably about a year ago, we'd spent a huge amount of our resources developing the technology, which was really important, and we were all absolutely focused on that, and that's what we were doing. And actually, once we got the technology, we didn't really have the resources left to be able to grow it. So what did we do? We just worked harder. Mm-hmm. We just worked really, really hard. And actually, it was getting access to the ScaleUp program that really helped us think through some of the real challenges that we'd got, and that was really a massive help to us.
Okay, but you got through the pain points.
We got through the pain point because we got a ScaleUp manager, Jim Doherty, who actually was able to sort of take a step back. It wasn't really that we didn't have the skills. We knew what we were supposed to be doing, but you don't always get the time to actually focus on those, because you're doing all the things that you've got to do, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
He actually, probably we came up with a new plan, and there were 3 key bits to it. We really needed to grow a commercial team, but we didn't have the money to do it, so we needed to raise some money as well. And the third bit, which we're going to go on to next, is really about our overseas potential as well, which is obviously part of the equation as well. So identifying those 3 things was the first bit, but we still didn't have the skills to do it. And through Jim, we were able to access people like Steve Bennett on recruitment. We were able to get help on building our pitch deck to go out and find investors. I'm a corporate guy. I've dealt with a lot of money, but I've never raised finance before. So I'm kind of poacher turned pheasant in that.
So I understand having a kind of a coach is really crucial to bring your business further.
Sorry.
To have a coach is really crucial to bring your business further. You just can't just do it on your own.
Yeah, very much. Because once we identify those things, just to say, here's an expert in those areas, I can introduce you to that person, and they can come and help you. And it was free as well. So I should mention that it was there's no commitment, but. Sometimes with things that are free, you don't, they're not really of great value, but this was of absolutely huge value.
Okay, thank you very much. Kim, can you pick up on a point or some points
Sure.
that Irene made?
Yes. We started the Institute with, not with the Star Wars music, but with very much Irene's point, And the point made earlier that we asked ourselves, why is it with such a rich ecosystem for tech startups in Canada, why we had relatively few globally competitive tech companies? And it's not the case that we have no idea how to scale up a company, because you've just talked about it, and it's been up on screen. Really, to scale, companies need access to talent, access to markets, and access to capital. We choose to focus on access to talent. We think that this is primary. And we make a distinction because I think when we talk about talent, or the war for talent, or the need for talent, our minds go initially to the need for developers and software engineers. But clearly you can't grow a business without sales and marketing, finance, and operations. But to scale, ideally you need people who've had this experience before of taking a company to global size. So this is where we put our efforts. We've really invested in developing a network of people who have been CEOs or on the executive teams of companies that have gone global, and we primarily source these people from the Valley, from New York, and from across Canada.
Okay.
But we're looking for people, and we've managed to find them. I mean, they're out there and so generous with their time. People from companies like LinkedIn and Facebook and Google and Amazon, Yelp, Adobe, SurveyMonkey, Uber, and Canadian success stories like Shopify or Canada Goose. We take in 10 companies at a time, and we provide them access to mentors, but also through programming. So we provide a year of mentorship, which is, I think, just what you're talking about, having that person there so that you are not reinventing the wheel.
Okay.
We bring in a year's worth of mentorship, and then our programming is calculated to bring these people together and workshop
So
through.
you have very much a human capital approach
Yeah.
you bring to the fore. Thank you very much. Thomas.
Sounds like a great program.
It's also free, which is important.
Great. I'm going to focus a little bit on in-company points. And when I think about what are the ingredients for scaling, some of them are the same as has been recently mentioned, but I start with making sure that you've got something that's worth scaling. Because there's not all companies that are worth scaling. So, and I think it's also really important that the ecosystem isn't trying to scale everything. So that means that we focus on understanding the unit economics of a business to the nth degree. And that means, in most cases, it's solving for lifetime value of a customer. So understanding how your business can scale with the right resources, whether it's capital or people or access to markets or whatever it is, that it makes sense. And that sounds like a pretty obvious thing, but I can assure you, having been in the investment business for so long, I've seen thousands of companies, and very, very many of them hadn't answered that question. And so once you've identified the unit economics that make sense to scale the business, then it's really important to focus, not stray away from a very singular goal. So I think there's a very high correlation between companies that manage to stay focused on what's working and not do anything else, and those who are successful. So it's almost as important to know what not to do as it is to what to do. And with that comes a very clear proposition, and from that comes a proposition of a brand. And I think a brand is important in all matters, not just B2C companies, but also B2B companies, because it is the key to how you attract finance, how you attract talent, how you attract customers, and how you also convince your employees that you're all going for the same thing, and that you can articulate brand values that you stand behind and that you execute against. It sounds trivial, but it's extremely important. So whether it's Last Minute or Love Film or Ocado or whatever all these companies we've been involved with, it has been extreme focus on doing one thing extremely well.
Okay, Thank you for this piece of advice. So focus on what to do, but also on what not to do, and keep your focus and your vision on just that. Svein.
We did a survey across the Nordics 2 or 3 years ago, and we looked into how is the toolbox for different companies across the Nordics. And we saw that in the Nordics we have quite good setups and governmental support measures for startups. But when it came to scale-ups, we saw that we were lacking the toolbox. So what we have done for the last 2 years is to run a program specifically designed for scale-ups. And as of today, we have had 35 companies through the program. What we did parallel to running the program was to appoint a high-level advisory board with representatives from both government and the private sector, so we could learn through the program. The program is designed having approximately 10 companies participating in each batch, and we have now carried out 4 batches.
Okay, and can anyone just apply to that program, or is it specifically for the Nordics?
It is specifically for the Nordics, but anybody in the Nordics can apply.
Okay, so why have you taken this regional approach?
Well, it makes sense. We are only 27 million people in the Nordics altogether, and due to the fact that we lack the experience on how to work with scale-ups, it makes sense to do it together.
Okay.
And of course, also learning from the best practice that we have between the Nordic countries.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to urge you to put in your questions again via Slido. I see some of them popping up already, and we'll get back to them shortly. I first have a question also for Kim. Sven talked about his ScaleUp program that they set up, but you have your own ScaleUp program as well, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and we do actually take very seriously the point that not every company can scale. So we accept applications from across Canada, and then the selection is done by a panel of VCs and serial entrepreneurs. Yeah. And those companies that show the most promising technology, but also a market of an appropriate size and the talent on their executive team and their revenue growth, we take those companies in and we match them with mentors, and we put together programming, 2 days of programming over 6 months in 6 different cities across the US and Canada. We find that the mentors are, not born, and mentors need to understand how to mentor, and companies need to understand how to best use a mentor. And we are finding that it has produced great results to match them up with the right people, to give them the information they need at the right time. And what they're doing when they are together for programming is they don't have time for case studies or for sort of practicing. They're working with mentors who are helping them through the challenges that they're facing in real time.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps also a question then from the audience which relates to that. How long can a company, or should a company, stay in a ScaleUp platform? How long does that take? Perhaps you have the experience, Kim, and Martin as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We are trying to encourage companies to work, as you were saying, on the business, not in the business. So we do take them out of their environment for 2 days a month over a period of 6 months. But we don't have a residency requirement. So I think the idea of how long should you be on a platform depends on the kind of time commitment that it requires, and that you have to be there in your business. But we do pull companies out for 2 days a month, okay, over 6 months. But the mentorship lasts a year. And there are different types of mentorship depending on the company and the challenges that they're facing.
Okay, Martin, what's your experience?
Yeah, I would think that's a pretty good estimate of a time. You can never say absolutely what the amount of time is, but for us, from the start of the program to where we are now, we will hopefully, touch wood if there is any around here, to finish our first funding round this month. So if you imagine that's the end of it, so that gives us then the money that we said we were going to go out and invest, which was a key part of our ScaleUp program. That money is going to be used to invest the people that we need. We've had help with Steve Bennett, who again through the ScaleUp program was an expert that we'd already got access to through then we've got a list of people lined up we'd like to recruit. As soon as we get that money, we're going to go out and recruit those people. As soon as we recruit those people, they're going to go out and sell our equipment, and as soon as we sell our equipment, we're going to scale up. So that's kind of the way it's going to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Thomas, we don't have a crystal ball. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here, and we would have had so many lovely ScaleUp companies making a lot of revenue. But how can companies plan for significant growth? Can they actually?
No, as you say, we don't have a crystal ball, but we don't necessarily then need to have a mud ball. We can, and I think it comes through, and so something I'm very preoccupied with these days, which is I call transparent business practices. So that means that all the data a company creates, whether it's operational data, financial data, customer data, and I'm not talking here about disclosing or so on, but having all that data organized in a way. Today there are lots of cloud systems that makes that possible. That information can be used to scale a business. That could be used, so, I recently started a growth finance business called Growth Street, and we finance SMEs and scale-ups. And we insisting on having access to all of their operational data. And that, I think, is, and through that we can provide much more efficient growth finance. And I think that those kinds of practices are going to be seen elsewhere. So whether it's transparent underwriting that I now know insurance companies are doing, they are insisting on seeing the same data. With that, they can provide a lower insurance. When it comes to having quicker diligence on onboarding customers and so on, I think it's a really important way for young companies to grow is to think about how they organize their information. And that means that also the same information that you provide to your finance partner is the same that you use to run the company. And I think that also means that within the company, people who are within the sort of the ground floor of the company versus the management of the company have the same data. They don't necessarily have all the same data, but they have at least operating from the same tools. And I think that's where we are heading. And I think that the more people embrace that type of mentality, the faster things will grow. I mean, more importantly, with a lower risk.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question also from the audience is about how should scale-ups be financed? And I think we can package that even broader. Should finance come just from the private sector? I think Irene also alluded to the points. For example, here, Innovate UK, some other government-funded agencies. Any thoughts on that, Svein?
I think it depends on what is the company going to do. And depending on how much risk is the company taking on. And you should, the government should support a company with sufficient finance so a company is able to take the risk so they can go through a growth phase.
Okay, and if you talk about your own experience, because you said you had a scale-up, how did you go about?
I worked in a company where we grew with more than 1,000 new employees for 3 consecutive years. And we were listed on the stock exchange, and we had a strong owner in addition.
Okay, thank you very much. Thomas, what's your experience?
Well, I think that the mix of government funds and private funds is healthy, but I am skeptical to. I think it should be always joined up. I think it's unhealthy if companies are reliant on government funds for too long. I think if they're doing pure science and pure research that are extremely difficult to quantify the timeline of and so on, there are gray zones there. But in general, I would like to see complements between private and public sector. I like when companies can take more risk because they have access to public funds. Mm-hmm. They can go further in the R&D, and they can go further in innovation than they otherwise would with just the private sector financing. And I think it's I think there's a blend there, but I do think that the public sector should be as demanding as the private sector, and not necessarily from a return perspective, but from a rigor perspective. But at the same time, avoiding becoming bureaucratic, which is then the sort of the risk there.
Okay, thank you. Kim, would you recommend using a mix of funding instruments?
Yes, I think that this has been well said. We have seen issues sometimes with government funding where I can't help it. The example in my head is a person who has led many of our program weekends on finance, and it's not hard to know his opinion. He makes it clear, and he has said every time, government funding is heroin. No, it's crack. Government funding is crack. Because it is, I think there is a danger in the government funding providing an artificial sense of demand for whatever the product or service is. But I agree entirely that for situations where the risk demands it and the timelines are very long for development, yes, I think it's been
Okay, thank you. And also depends a little bit on what Thomas said and what stage you are in terms of TRL levels, if you're more on like the applied research side of things or more towards commercialization of your product or service. Sven?
I think also you should differentiate between what kind of governmental financing you're talking about. In the early phase, when the risk is high and the results are uncertain, then you should have more soft support, grants, for instance. But when you come into a growth phase, then you should have more measures like loans and also equity.
Yeah, okay. Martin?
But I think you can also, I just want
Yes.
to add to that, I think you can also use the government sources or funds to give access to them being a client early. And that's another way of financing a business is by buying their product earlier than they otherwise would have.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, you can buy one of Martin's machines and then put it into work somewhere where there is other people doing interesting innovation. You know, that sort of thing would be also useful.
You're going to buy Martin's machines?
Yeah, well,
Great idea, right?
well, I'm not the government. I might buy Martin's machine for other reasons, but that's a different thing.
Okay, thank you. Martin?
Yeah, I can tell you what we did effectively, which probably reflects exactly what the panel said as well, which is we had some individual private investors start with, which got us going, and but I don't think we'd have been able to go out to the market and raise money when we didn't really have a product to sell, and that's where the Innovate UK came in and really helped us. So we did a market research study to start with to see if the idea was a good one. Then we did a proof of concept study with Innovate UK, and the last one was a prototype building project, which actually proved to be the turning point probably for us, where we were actually made to go out and collaborate by Innovate UK, because you have to do that. And the collaboration we had was with the MTC, the Manufacturing Technology Centre, which we've built a digital twin with, which puts us right at the forefront of technology. Bradford University did the digitalization of the forces in the material that we're using to actually apply and hold the packs together. And then we had DHL, who are a big potential customer, who've actually run that prototype machine. And that prototype machine turned out not to be a prototype because of the digitalization process, but it actually turned out to be a first production machine. So that bit, I don't think difficult as a private fund, because it's risky, and actually our passion and our desire to get it came through. Now is a separate thing. Now with the commercialization, the scale-up bit, we have to grow up and stand on our own 2 feet, and that means we've got to go out to the market. And in this particular case, looks like help from what's called the Northern Powerhouse Fund, which is effectively for businesses like us, which are higher risk than venture capitalists would be perhaps prepared to take, and give us an opportunity to get the funding that we need.
Okay.
So it's kind of horses for courses, as they say.
Okay, thank you for providing this overview and giving a very concrete example on how to put the whole funding ecosystem to work. I think I also have a very short question for you. You only have to answer with yes or no. Martin, do you have a risk appetite?
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yeah, some people would say it's a
It's just yes or no. It's a yes?
It's a yes. It's a loud yes.
Loud yes. Sven?
Absolutely.
Okay, so, well, you're quite unique then, because there really is a lack of risk appetite in Europe. So how can we deal with that? I mean, even before pushing those companies to the scale-up phase, they should have this inherent risk appetite. So how do you mentor people to develop that?
One of the key learnings from the 35 companies that we have worked with through the program is that, first of all, mentoring is number one. That is the feedback from the companies. That is the most valuable support that they get. But secondly, they say that the peer-to-peer meetings, training, is a way of inspiring them to grow further. They meet the others who are in the same situation, and they see that this is possible. They are able to go through with the process. And for me, working for the governments, I do not have the cred to say this, but if another person who has gone through the
same process. Okay, Thomas?
Well, two things. First is that culturally, Europe needs to embrace failure. We need to accept failure as a road to success eventually. And that means it's easy to say than to do, but it's also important to fail quickly. And so not to cling on to a dream that turns out to be a not so good dream. But that also means that there is an opportunity in the middle of that, which is called pivoting. And so you can have something that looks quite successful, and then it sort of stalls. And then you pivot, and then you find a different direction that starts to work. And the best entrepreneurs, they pivot and pivot and pivot. Very specific example. We launched started a company called Love Film. Love Film was a DVD subscription business, and we grew like crazy, and we were in many countries around Europe. And then we realized that the consumer wants to see stuff digitally. And we were shipping around DVDs, and we had to pivot. And we pivoted, and it was a rough pivot, I can assure you that. But it was successful, and eventually the company was bought by Amazon, and it's today what many of you view as Amazon Prime. That is Love Film. But I can assure you, when we were sitting there thinking about, hey, what do we do now? It wasn't so obvious. It's sort of in hindsight, everything looks obvious. And I think that's an important message for entrepreneurs, is to sort of look at, be extremely kind of honest with each other.
Exactly. Thank you. Kim?
I think we've touched on a couple of important points.
Yes.
The idea that the companies that come to us, that apply, they have a healthy appetite for risk. But I think tempering that risk and making it an intelligent risk, the peer network is extremely effective. When it comes to cultural approaches to risk or reactions to risk, I think that there are a lot of changes that need to be made in the education system. I think these are far-reaching and difficult, but I think that it is inevitable that we help people learn to accept risk by this taking away the stigma of failure and, again, teaching people to fail early. This is not really what we are good at in terms of an education system.
So do we, or should we start already at the primary school level?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, as early and as young as possible.
Actually, one of the great models of that is here in the UK with, I think it's called Founders for Schools.
Yeah.
The former CEO of UK ScaleUp, I know, has been involved in this venture, and I agree. I think it needs to start in primary school. You see it in the way that we sort of beat creativity out of children. They're so creative, and then by the time they come to the end of high school, we've definitely helped them to lose most of that. And we need to start, yes, earlier. But at the university level, there's still so much we can do.
But for that, we need broader societal acceptance, of course, to rule like that. Yeah. Sven, and then I'll come to Martin.
I come to think of one story that I have experienced, is that when I grew up, I was a downhill skier. And when we were practicing and doing competitions, we were filmed all the time. And after practice, we saw the film over again, and we played over and over and over again every time we ended up with our noses in the snow. Then I moved to the US, starting playing American football. Then we also filmed the games that we played, but then we replayed every good game that we played over and over and over again. So we need to, in a way, learn to celebrate the successes that we have and not only trying to learn from the mistakes that we do.
That's a good point.
Nice. Yeah.
Very nice example. Martin?
No, I agree with all of that. I tend to, in my mind, think of risk in two parts, really. There's inventing stuff is a very different piece to innovating stuff. So we want people who can invent stuff, great ideas that they're prepared to follow, and that's great. And that is risky, but not necessarily doesn't have to involve an awful lot of money either at that stage. The innovation bit, which is the definition being taking that invention to market and commercializing it, is risky, but you can mitigate that risk along by getting the right people, collaboration. The ScaleUp program was instrumental for us. You're looking to just reduce the risk all the time. But to Thomas's point as well, you've got to listen, and if there's something that fundamentally comes up that you see as being wrong, you've got to have the courage to say, that's it. It's not gonna fly. But definitely thinking about how do you mitigate the risk of innovation, which is the area where I'm in now. The invention is the invention. The innovation, we can mitigate that risk. Scale up, financing, all help to.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have almost come to the end, and I have a final question for you, and I'd like you to answer that one with one word. I know it's very tough, but you're very good at it, I'm sure. What is your wish for future ScaleUps?
More successes.
More successes. Thomas?
Transparency.
Good one.
That's a good one.
One word.
Yes.
Okay. Data.
Data?
We need the data.
Okay, very good.
Passion.
Passion. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand to our panel.